wide. Adjust the width of your first row if need be. Remember to factor in a 12mm expansion gap at each end of the room. If you'll be fitting the laminate around a door frame, start by removing the door and then line up an offcut of underlay and a floorboard with the architrave. Use a panel saw to trim the architrave at their combined height. Then, use a hammer and chisel to remove enough of the bottom of the architrave that the laminate will fit underneath it. Be sure to leave a suitable expansion gap. Most manufacturers recommend laying a foam or fiberboard underlay, which should be laid perpendicular to the laminate. Be sure to select a product that is suitable for your floor type and to carefully follow manufacturer's instructions when laying. Then, starting at the left-hand corner of the wall where the door is, lay the first piece of laminate with its tongue edge against the wall. Move the board slightly so you can insert the spaces between the board and both walls. Line the next board up with the end of the first and press down to click it into position, maintaining the expansion gap with spacers. Continue along the wall until you can't lay any more full boards, ensuring the line of boards is perfectly straight. To fill the gap at the end of a row, lay a full board down parallel with your previous row. Flip the board end over end so it's upside down with the groove edge still facing you, but the other end now touching the wall spacer. Use a tri-square and pencil to mark a cutting guideline parallel with the end of the previous board. Carefully secure the board into your workbench, then make the cut with the jigsaw or panel saw. Place the cut piece into position to complete the first row. If the offcut's at least 300mm long, use it to start the next row from the same end of the room as you started the first row. Otherwise, start the row with a new board sawn in half. Put a spacer into position against the wall, then place the tongue edge of the new board into the groove edge of the previous row at a 20 to 30 degree angle. Line the next board up so the tongue is joining the groove of the previous board at 20 to 30 degrees. Press down to click into position and continue to lay the second row. Make sure that the joint between boards in adjoining rows is always offset by at least 300mm. Once the second row is in place, it's time to fill in the gap between the first row and the door. How you prepare the board will depend on how large the gap is and which direction you're laying your boards. Here we're laying our boards horizontally and only have a small gap to fill. Start by measuring the distance between the outer edge of the architrave on either side. Then, measure the gap between the first row and the door. Mark these measurements onto a board and cut it to size with a jigsaw. Remember to allow for a 10 to 12mm expansion gap at each end. Then, lay the cut board up against the architrave and mark where you need to trim the ends so that the board will be able to slide under the architrave. If you're laying the boards vertically, you'll need to do this to all the boards that come into contact with the architrave. Cut along the guide marks and then slide the first two rows back from the doorway and join the piece of board you've cut. Carefully slide everything back into position so the leading board fits underneath the architrave. Then, continue to lay the subsequent rows of laminate as you did the first and second row. If you need to cut boards to fit the gap in the final row, you'll need to ensure the tongue edge of the board can still lock into the groove of the previous row. Measure the gap you need to fill, not forgetting space for expansion gaps, and mark it onto the board. Then, cut the board and lay as normal. The method for fitting twin click is very similar to rapid fit, other than the locking mechanism. For twin click flooring, boards in the same row are joined by inserting them at a 20 to 30 degree angle into the connection slot, then clicking them down into position. Then, assemble the whole of the next row, including making any necessary cuts, before connecting any boards to the previous row. Once a whole row is complete, angle the new row at 20 to 30 degrees to the previous one, and click the edge locking connections into position. it's best to ask a friend to help with this. First, cut the board to the correct length or width so it would fit if the pipe wasn't there. Lay the board to the side of the pipe and using a tri-square, draw a pencil line onto the board to show where the centre of the pipe is. Then, move the board so it's front on to the pipe and draw a line to mark where the centre of the pipe is. Where the two lines intersect is where the centre of the pipe will be positioned. Secure the board with clamps and use a drill and 32mm flat wood drill bit to drill a hole where the two lines intersect. Using a straight edge, draw a pair of lines from the edges of the hole to the edge of the board, each at a slight outward angle. Cut along these lines with a jigsaw or panel saw to create a wedge-shaped offcut. Fit the board into position, then apply grab adhesive to the contact areas of the offcut and put into place. You can trim the profile with a chisel if need be. Hide the expansion gap with a radiator pipe surround. Be sure to choose a threshold bar that is suitable for your flooring. Carefully measure the width of the door frame, allowing for an expansion gap on both sides. Then, cut the threshold bar to size. If your design needs to be cut to shape to sit flush with the frame, carefully mark out notches at either end and cut with a hacksaw. Then, secure the threshold bar as per the manufacturer's instructions. Before you refit the door, you may need to trim the bottom of the door to accommodate the height of the threshold, board, and underlay. If you remove the original skirting, and it's thick enough to cover the expansion gap, reinstall it now. Alternatively, remove all the spacers, trim down any membrane to just below the laminate height, then measure and mark the lengths of flooring trim you need. Use a miter box and handsaw to make 45-degree angle cuts at the ends that will join in the corners. Finally, use grab adhesive to fix the flooring trim to the skirting. If necessary, you can hold the trim in place with panel pins whilst the adhesive dries. Don't fix the trim to the laminate floor as this will prevent expansion. Here is the list of tools you'll need to lay your laminate flooring. And here are the materials you'll use.